Well, Jennifer, thank you very much, and I want to say thanks to all of you who are coming out this afternoon, giving me an opportunity to visit with you about the issue of the value and worth of every human life. I want to begin by telling you that for me, this is not a political issue, and I was not involved in the pro-life movement after I got into politics. I don't know of anybody that'll run on the Republican ticket who won't say, I'm pro-life. But I know a lot of people became pro-life after they got involved in running for office on the Republican ticket. For me, it's a little different. My pro-life involvement began back in the 1970s. And I was a part of a group at that time when Southern Baptists really weren't that focused on the life issue. Quite frankly, it was our Catholic brothers and sisters who were the leaders in the pro-life cause. And evangelicals were somewhat ambivalent about the life issue. I just don't think it was something they thought about. And I was involved with a couple of attorneys from Missouri in helping to form a group called Southern Baptists for Life. And our goal was to try to make this a bigger issue among Southern Baptists. And we began to try to get the platform of the Southern Baptist Convention to adopt a stronger pro-life statement, to get more emphasis in everything from Sunday school literature, and eventually we're able to get the Southern Baptist Convention to have a Sanctity of Life Sunday, the closest to the Roe v. Wade decision and the annual March for Life. So it had some impact, and then of course Southern Baptists went through a sort of a theological revolution where the denomination clearly decided that it was going to stick with a view of inerrancy and infallibility of Scripture. It took a strong conservative turn, and from that point forward, it really was not as difficult to get Southern Baptists engaged in the issue of the life question, because, to be honest with you, pretty much all the liberals decided to go elsewhere. And that was a healthy kind of purge within the Southern Baptist Convention for those of us who were truly conservative and pro-life, and who were strong on the issue of biblical authority. So I wanted to give you that background. Fast forward to the 1980s. I was a pastor in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and I was a part of a statewide committee that was called the Unborn Child Committee. Our purpose and our goal was to get an amendment to the Arkansas Constitution on the ballot in Arkansas that would say that from conception until natural death, the policy of the state of Arkansas in the Constitution, not statutorily, but in the Constitution, was to be for life. And one of the other two principals, well, there were four of us, I guess. One was a prominent attorney in Little Rock by the name of Rod Shaver. Another one was a constitutional attorney by the name of Leon Holmes. He's now a federal judge appointed by George W. Bush. The other was Jerry Cox, who at the time was a school teacher, and for the past 25 years, he has led an organization called the Arkansas Family Policy Council. The four of us were the primary state officials behind the movement to get this issue on the ballot. We got it on the ballot on 3 different occasions. The first time we lost, the second time we won the election but was overthrown by the Supreme Court, and the third time was the charm and it passed. That was all in the 80s. I started getting involved in elective politics in the early 90s. And for me, the issue of life, as I said, was never a political issue. I did not become pro-life because of politics. I became political because I was pro-life. And so I wanted to just help you to understand that this is not some position that you're going to say, oh, well, yeah, but you used to be. No, I didn't used to be anything. I've been pro-life. You're not going to find a speech I made or a position I took or a paper I wrote or a letter that I ever signed to anybody that takes a position other than what you're going to hear from me today. That may or may not matter to you, but it matters to me because I really am concerned that so many people, when they run for office, they will say all the right things and they will give the right answers. But the question is, what's in their heart? What do they truly believe? And how long have they believed it? And when did they make the change? And why did they make the change? If they're not consistent in having been pro-life, why not? Because I believe that this is an issue that really helps us to understand a foundation of what's important to us. And it is not negotiable. It's not optional for me. I don't think a civilization can go forward if we believe that some among us are expendable or disposable. My pro-life position comes actually from the Declaration of Independence. It says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Think about that for a moment. What makes America the most amazing and unique country is our understanding that all of us are equal. And if you stop and put it in the context of the Revolution, it really was a stunning change of view from what the world had known. These were people who had come from their mother country. And in England there was a sense, and some people were worth more than others. And your worth and value was determined by what your last name was, how much land you owned, who was your father, what was your ancestry. For our founding fathers to create a country that said that we are created equal went against the grain of the entire culture that they had grown up with. It was pretty astonishing. It was, in fact, to put it in a very appropriate word, it was revolutionary. And there was the American Revolution. Now, it took a long time even for America to begin to fully practice this notion of equality. Here we are in a museum dedicated to African American history and heritage. It was 150 years in this country before there was really a recognition that people of color were equal to people who were Caucasian. And I guess perhaps with some people that'll never be fully understood. But I don't know of anybody today that truly believes that some people are worth more than others and some are worth less than others until it comes to the issue of abortion. And there are some who believe that there is such a thing as a child who is expendable, disposable. It's like saying that the child who has Down syndrome isn't worth as much as the captain of the football team. When we begin to put an evaluation that some people are worth more than others, we not only defy God's law, we defy our own law as a nation.
That's right.
And I do believe that it is not a peripheral issue. I believe it's a foundational issue. And from this, if a person believes that it is okay to take the life of an unborn child, or for that matter to take the life of an elderly person, because they represent a financial hardship or an inconvenience to their social life that would disrupt it, then I believe that that says a whole lot about that culture, that civilization, that society, and what it says is not good. The logic of abortion as we practice it today is really the logic of slavery. Because it's the notion that one person can have sole ownership over another person, even to the point of life and death. It is something that we would all repudiate if we put it in those terms. But we need to put it in the terms that there should be no such thing as one person having absolute power, control, even life and death decisions over another human being. So when I tell you that I'm pro-life, I want you to understand it's not just a political position that I'm going to put on the piece of paper. And it's not something I'm just going to tell you because I know that's what you want to hear. I've said it on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. I've said it with Bill Maher. I've said it everywhere I've ever been. And I've never said it in a way that somehow backed off of it or in any way compromised on what that means. Which, by the way, when I was on Jon Stewart, The Daily Show, and I talked about this issue, I actually got cheered by his audience. Now that was a shocker, because it was not a pro-life audience. It was not an audience that agreed with me philosophically, but here's how I put it. I said that there should be, in this country, an understanding that all of us have intrinsic worth and value, and that we should never devalue another human being. And I said that for those of us who are pro-life, it means more than just we want to protect the baby as long as it's in gestation. I said because we also, as pro-life people, care what happens to that baby when it's born. We care when that baby's 8 weeks in the womb, 8 months in the womb. We care when that baby is 8 months out of the womb and 8 years out of the womb and living in the backseat of a car under a bridge as a homeless kid. And we care what happens to that person when he's 80 years old and is in long-term care and nobody comes to see him. Pro-life does not end at birth. Life begins at conception. But to be pro-life means that you adamantly want to protect all life throughout its existence until natural death. I want to share with you something that I feel like distinguishes me or separates me from many others. There will be people you'll hear say, I'm pro-life and I will fight for the life issue. And I will fight that we will overturn Roe v. Wade. And when I hear somebody say that, that tells me they don't understand what Roe v. Wade does. Overturning Roe v. Wade does not end abortion in this country. The only thing it does is push it back to the states, and the states then will have full control. In some states, like my home state of Arkansas, where people like me work to get a human life amendment, it would effectively end abortion in that state. But in other states, like New York, it might open up more abortion. There would be no ban, and in most states, it's possible there could be more, not fewer, abortions if Roe v. Wade were overturned. Frankly, the overturning of Roe v. Wade makes the issue of abortion geographical. I personally think that's a terrible idea because the issue of abortion is a moral issue. It's not political. Therefore, it can't be geographical. If we can make abortion geographical, then, quite frankly, the South was on the right side of the slavery question 150 years ago. You say, that's shocking. Well, I don't believe that it was, and I say that as a Southerner. But here's the point. The logic of the Civil War was that you could have a different moral standard for slavery in some states than you did in others. And so the fight was over whether or not that there could be something of a national understanding that it was immoral for people to own other people. Abraham Lincoln was right. It is immoral to ever think that a person could own another person. I know of no one today, I personally don't know of anyone who would justify slavery or think that we should go back to the place to let each state decide whether slavery is okay or not. Why should we ever get to the place where we think that abortion could be okay in some states, unacceptable in others? If it truly does represent a repugnant moral decision, then there cannot be 50 different definitions of what's right and what's wrong when it's life and when it is not. So I reject the notion that that is our goal. And that's why when I hear a politician say that, I know they're really not pro-life. They may pretend they are, they may even think they are, but they're not. They don't understand what they're really advocating. Or what if a person says, we should appoint better Supreme Court justices? I'm sure we should. But once again, the best we can get out of that is a repeal of the abortion decision. It does not end abortion. There are others who think that perhaps what we should do is pass a human life amendment to the Constitution. Well, that would be delightful, but the problem with it is that it would be very difficult to get that through because we're talking 37 states to ratify. And yes, while I would work diligently toward that, if it ever could happen, it would take years and years. There's a better approach. And this is what I have said. And it's one thing that I believe does indeed separate me from any other candidate running for president. Because I'm the only one who's said it. And here's the point. We don't have to pass a constitutional amendment to protect life. Because we already have 2 constitutional amendments that protect life. We just have to simply accept them and apply them. I speak of the 5th and the 14th Amendment, and here's what I mean. The 5th Amendment explicitly says that no person can be deprived of life or liberty without due process. The 14th Amendment passed in 1868, which was to finalize the idea that there could not be separate laws in each state regarding slavery, provided for equal protection under the law with the application of the 5th Amendment, and said that there cannot be different state laws, that those have to be uniform in applying the 5th Amendment. So if you take the 2 of them together, it simply says no person can be deprived of life or liberty without due process. Here's what I ask you. Is the unborn child a person? That's really the question. If the unborn child is a clump of cells or a blob of tissue, then there is no protection. If the unborn child is in fact a human life, then it has personhood. And if personhood, then it is entitled to its constitutional protection under the 5th and 14th Amendment. You say, how would that be implemented? It was very simple. A president would apply those constitutional provisions using the full power of the executive branch, including the Justice Department, to provide protection for every human being from conception until natural death, because there is no due process in place. Now let me explain what would happen practically. The President declares that, he would get sued, we'd go to court, and here would be the discussion. Bring the best biologists in the world to the courtroom and put them under oath and ask them, what is that inside the mother's womb? Is it a human, or is it something other than a human? It can only be one of the two. And if it's something other than a human, then what is it? Is it a puppy? A stalk of broccoli? Is it a dolphin? What will it be? And here's the point. Biologically, we know exactly, because 23 male, 23 female chromosomes came together at the precise moment of fertilization, and that created a DNA that has never existed before and never will again. For those who argue that it is a part of the mother's physical body, they're biologically wrong. Because the baby may not even have the same blood type as the mother, most certainly does not have the same DNA. If it were a part of her body, then it would require her body to live. Babies can live outside the mother's body. The mother's heart, lungs, liver, any other vital organ cannot. To say that it is a mere part is biologically incorrect. Let us go to court. Let's have this discussion. I'm tired of people on the far left telling me that on climate change the science is settled, but on this issue they want to say the science is muddled. No, the science is far more settled on this issue than it is on climate change. But it requires somebody with the courage to say, it's time for us to end this scourge. It's time for us to stop this national nightmare. 60 million unborn children have died in 43 years. As of yesterday, 43 years. 60 million. We want to know why we import so much of our workforce? Because we kill 60 million of them. Want to know why we don't have enough money to fund Social Security? Because we killed a lot of the workers that would have been paying in. I mean, I could give you a long litany of things that have happened. We don't even know what all we don't have today, because we ended up in a barbaric approach, taking the lives of unborn children. And I've spoken out on this. I even produced a movie called The Gift of Life. I hope if you haven't seen it, I urge you to. Because it even gets into the question about, what about all this, the exceptions? And I realize there are people, good, decent people, who make allowances for many exceptions. I would only say, watch The Gift of Life. And I think you'll come to the conclusion that it's very hard to start making exceptions. Because the real question, is it a life? Is it human? If it is, then there are certain things that we owe that human being. If it isn't, then all bets are off. So for me, this is not an issue which I'm saying, vote for me and I'll pretend I'm pro-life. I tell you this, vote for me. I get to the White House and I will do something that should have been done years before. Something that will end this horrible, horrible, uncivilized behavior. And I believe this with all my heart. I don't think you can explain America apart from God's providence. But I also believe you can't explain why America is struggling until we address how impossible it is for us to invoke His blessing as we're going about the process of killing 4,000 babies every day in America. Imagine, how do we pray? How do we sing? How do we say, God bless America, if every day we take the lives of 4,000 unborn children? Let me make one other point. Often on college campuses when I speak and I talk about the life issue, students will challenge me and they'll make it like, well, I have a right. I said, look, let me just explain to you. Can you live with the logical conclusion of your own position that you can take a life for the purpose of the social disruption or the financial hardship that it will cause? Because basically abortion on demand is generally one of those two things. So here's the question. Once we've established that any human life is expendable when it represents financial hardship or social disruption, then by logic you have to apply that at all levels of the human spectrum. So if it is true that that life can end prior to birth, and some people believe it can even happen in late term, when the child is viable outside the womb, then there's nothing at all that would say that if a human being at any stage represents social disruption or financial hardship, you have a right to take its life. Fast forward to the opposite end of the spectrum. The person's 85 years old, has advanced dementia, is in long-term care. It's very much a financial hardship to the family. It is very much a social disruption to the family who, instead of being able to go to the lake on the weekend, have to go check on grandma. If we have taught the generation before us that life at that end of the spectrum is expendable, then we have given them the license to take our lives when they are our caretakers. And if we become that callous, don't think they won't do it. That's why it's not just a political issue. It defines what kind of civilization we in fact will be. Great question. How do you get the judges to agree? You don't. But the courts are not legislators. Look, here's the mistake we've made. We have pretended for 70 years, we didn't do this in the first part of our country's history. Only in the last 70 years or so have we surrendered the two other branches of government to the judiciary as if they are the final and last and only word. I want to remind everybody that when you took civics, my guess is that you learned something, that there are three branches of government, not one. You learned that those three branches are equal. And you learned that there is a separation of powers between the branches, and that each of the three branches was created to be a check and balance on the other. If the judiciary is the final last word that cannot be challenged, then how is it equal to the other two? Doesn't it have a larger part of equality? Jefferson said if we subscribe to that view, because it was discussed in the early days of our country, read Federalist Paper 75. Here's what he said, that if the judiciary is treated as if it is the ultimate, final, last word, then we have surrendered to a doctrine of judicial supremacy, and his exact words, we have turned the Constitution into a thing of wax. It was not just Jefferson, but Madison and Adams also were very careful to warn us not to ever allow the judiciary to take power that the Constitution never gave them. The courts can't make law. Roe v. Wade is an illegal, unconstitutional law to begin with, because there's nothing in the Constitution that defines the beginning or origin of life. The justices who came out with Roe v. Wade had to create out of thin air a basis for abortion on demand by tying it to privacy. It's really about protecting doctors and privacy. It's the most irrational, illogical view, and we've just fallen over and acted like, well, there's nothing we do. And I've heard people say, including presidential candidates, it's the law of the land. And they say that about other court decisions. Let me just say to you, it is not the law of the land because the court rules it. If the people's elected representatives have not affirmed it in legislation, because the courts cannot legislate. They are the Supreme Court. That means within the judicial branch, they are the Supreme Court within that branch. They are not the Supreme Branch, and they are most certainly not the Supreme Being. You know what's frightening to me? Is that when I say that, people go, oh my goodness, that's radical. No, it's radical to surrender the entire country to a group of 5 unelected lawyers and totally surrender this great republic to unelected lawyers. And if you really want to hear the most scathing understanding of this, read John Roberts and his especially, but also Scalia's dissent on the same-sex marriage ruling from last June. Stunningly brilliant assessment of why we can't just roll over and let a court make law. Because to do so surrenders 320 million people's constitutional rights to a majority of 5 unelected lawyers. The question is, how do we get rid of judges that overreach? First of all, we should have term limits on every member of the judiciary, as well as the legislative. It was never put in, although it was discussed in the early days of our country, and quite frankly, you want to hear the interesting reason why? Because they said, there's no way people would want to be in government forever. You see, they couldn't imagine. They couldn't imagine that somebody wanted to make a life out of this. So they didn't think that it was important. They wouldn't have to worry about it. Boy, would they ever be shocked now to see how people have turned it into a lucrative career for life. But we do have two provisions that we can deal with it. One, we can change the Constitution to put term limits, which I wish we would. The second, we can impeach judges. There's actually a third, we can ignore judges. And frankly, it is the right, let me go further, it is the responsibility of the other two branches. When the judiciary is out of its boundaries and it is acting beyond the limits of its power, then the other two branches have the responsibility, not just the right, the responsibility to ignore that ruling. And if somebody says, well, they have to do it, well, let the people's elected representatives agree that the court has properly ruled. But that hasn't happened. Somebody else?
Do they know it? Do they know they should do that? I don't think the
Well, you got to remember that most law schools today teach on the basis of legal precedent rather than actual constitutional language.
That's the problem.
So lawyers will this is what scares me about lawyers. They will lawyer stuff, and they will point to you 14 different opinions and cases and use that as the basis for what they conclude. If we were really true to our republic, it would be the constitutional language that would trump any legal opinion or any judicial ruling. But that's one of the reasons we have people who are, quite frankly, smart lawyers, and they can argue all sides of an issue, but this shouldn't be that complicated. And it goes back, I just tell you again, it goes back to what you learned in 9th grade civics, that the judicial branch is an equal branch, a separate branch, but it is not the only or ultimate branch, and it has to be subject to the same checks and balances as does the executive and the legislative. Yes, well, again, my idea is a little better than that. We stop abortion. The Justice Department would make it very clear, what due process are these babies getting? They're not getting any. The abortion clinic is closed. See, defunding Planned Parenthood is the highest attainable hope that some politicians have. I want to see us abolish abortion. I want to be the president who does that. Not simply make it rare, I want to make it extinct. That's the difference. The best stem cell research is not stem cell research that's coming from unborn children. It's adult stem cells. I don't think there's a biblical or a moral prohibition about stem cell research or stem cell medical efforts, but I do think that there is both a moral and an absolute biblical issue of which we take baby body parts and again to use stem cells from them that were aborted for the purpose of biological experiments. And again, it's not necessary because the most effective stem cell research has not involved the embryonic. A lot of people hear stem cell and they think all stem cell research is the same, and it most certainly is not. And so pro-life people are not against stem cell research, they're just against stem cell research in which the stem cells are taken from aborted babies. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to make the comment that closing Planned Parenthood down, it should be having the government quit giving them our tax dollars. Mm-hmm. That's my big allure with Planned Parenthood, that they get all this money for what? Because they have tons of money saved.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to the point that if all we do is stop federal funding for Planned Parenthood, we don't stop Planned Parenthood.
No, I know that.
Nor do we stop abortion. We only stop a small number of abortions that are funded through Planned Parenthood, which might cause them not to have enough money to do their other things. Abortion is a cash cow for Planned Parenthood. And all this stuff about they provide so many good health services, mostly they don't. They farm it out. They don't do any mammograms, for example. None. And they'll talk about those. They don't do any. They send people to other places. So this idea that they're such a provider of women's health services, I'm more than willing for us to provide the women's health services that supposedly are very, very vital without providing abortion and chopping people's babies up into pieces and selling them as if they were parts to a car. But I want to make it clear that if the best somebody can promise you is if I'm president, I'll stop Planned Parenthood funding, I'm sorry, but that's not really a very bold pro-life position. I mean, give me more than that, or forget about it. If that's the best you can do, then we're not much better off than we are now. That's low-hanging fruit down below my knee. Let's do something bolder than that. Let's not just stop Planned Parenthood federal funding. Let's stop abortion. And then Planned Parenthood, since they won't be doing abortions anymore, because they'll be illegal, then they can provide all those wonderful women's health services that they claim that they're in business for. Well, you do it because it's already there. It's the same, leave it this way. I don't have to go and create an executive order to say the press has First Amendment rights, because they already have them. The president doesn't give them, but the president must enforce them. If somebody violates First Amendment rights, the executive branch, through its judicial division, through the Department of Justice, is legally required to protect the First Amendment rights of a newspaper or a television station, that it would not be subject to government censorship. It's not that we have to create the First Amendment, not that we have to write an executive order. We have the amendment itself, which supersedes any executive order.
Right, but are you saying then you would be directing your Attorney General to sue Planned Parenthood in court?
You don't have to sue them. You declare that abortion cannot continue, that it is illegal, based on the Fifth Amendment, because every person is entitled to due process before they can be denied life and liberty.
But my question is, what about if they just ignore you? Then what do you do then? Like if Planned Parenthood says, I understand what you say, President Huckabee.
Right.
I don't care. We didn't support you. We're going to keep doing abortions. Then
the Justice Department has every right to go and put a padlock on the door.
Okay, so that.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, you enforce the law. The law is the Constitution, and the Constitution is a higher law than any statutory requirement. That's why it's powerful, because it's constitutional. It's not statutory. Now, I understand full well what that invokes.
Yeah.
A lawsuit, a challenge. It'll happen. It'll be a challenge congressionally. There'll be a challenge judicially. Fine, because keep in mind, if the reason and the basis for which we have invoked the Fifth Amendment is the personhood of the unborn child, then the burden of proof will be to prove that is not a child. The high road is we protect every human life. We protect a person who has Down syndrome. We protect a person who is physically, developmentally disabled. Nobody would fault the president if he says, you can't go kill a person in a wheelchair. Everybody says, well, of course you can. You better, Mr. President, protect that person. All I'm saying is we're going to protect every person, including the unborn children. And let them prove in court that there's a difference between the person in the wheelchair and the person in the womb. Let them prove there's a difference between the captain of the football team and the kid who has Down syndrome. Let them prove that life inside the mother's womb is not human. And then let them tell us what it is. And they have the burden of proof. And when they put witnesses on the stand, those witnesses will be under oath. Let the biologists come forth who will tell us that that's not a human being. I mean, again, that's a discussion I'm willing for us to have as a country.
But the way to initiate that would be actually ordering your Attorney General to, if necessary, go in and maybe even seize the Planned Parenthood if they're just completely ignoring it.
Look at it the same way that you would if another of the constitutional rights were being violated. Let's say it was the First Amendment. And if a state said to a newspaper, you can't publish nasty things about the governor of the state, and the governor came to that decision, and the governor shut a newspaper down, the federal government would be required to step in and say, that's a decision you can't make because it violates their First Amendment rights of free speech, free expression, and freedom of the press. And I don't think the press would write you a nasty editorial about that. Now, they would about what I would want to do. But I just want you to understand, the principles are absolutely the same. The problem is nobody's ever had just the raw guts to do this. And if you think it's insanity, vote for somebody else, because there are a lot of candidates who I guarantee you aren't going to do what I'm talking about. They won't even mention it, much less commit to it. I understand that. But either it's right to kill 4,000 babies a day or it isn't. If it is okay for us to do that, I'm wrong. Don't elect me. But if you think it's wrong to kill 4,000 babies a day, then we need to stop it.
Amen.
We need to stop it. And if we don't have the courage to stop it, then how do we ask God to bless us? Good question. I guess the question is, who gets criminalized? Let me be very clear, it's not the mother. I've said for 40 years, there are two victims with every abortion. One is the unborn child, the other is the birth mother. I view the women who have abortions as victims, not criminals. And part of the reason is because in the first half of my adult life, among the careers I had, one of them was a pastor, and I counseled many women who, when they were teenagers, had abortions. And the guilt and the pain that they had from that going into their 30s, especially those who started having children, I can't begin to tell you how devastating and overwhelming that guilt was. And, you know, I never thought it made sense to punish somebody for being talked into an act that they didn't fully comprehend and understand. So, you know, I've been accused of one, I don't know where this came from. Somebody said I was going to roll the National Guard out to go arrest women. And I mean, that was, I don't know where that came from. I never said anything even close to that. So that's not how we solve it. We're not out to criminalize people. We're out to save babies.
What about the doctors?
Even the doctors. I mean, my first goal is not to criminalize doctors. It's just to stop them. I mean, I honestly don't think that we do our culture and society a big favor by locking people up. I think we do a bigger favor by starting to protect the babies. Now, if the doctor continued just to, you know, violate the law and completely ignore the protection that should be afforded the unborn child, don't rule anything out. But that, again, that's not the purpose. The purpose is saving babies, not criminalizing anybody. It's to stop something, not to go and incarcerate people. I'm concerned that an electromagnetic pulse would be devastating to the point that experts say that up to 90% of the American population could likely die within a year if somebody were able to create a nuclear explosion high above that would fry every electronic component in the U.S. And frankly, that's not science fiction. That's very plausible. Sounds like science fiction, but it isn't. And that's why we have to be worried about crazy countries like North Korea and Iran having nuclear devices. They don't have to hit a city with a target. They have to explode it above, fry the electric grid. The dumb thing is that for $2 billion, which is a lot of money, I can't write a check for that, but it's not a big amount of money in the great scheme of our federal budget, but for $2 billion, we could at least protect the national electric grid and give it a protection that it doesn't currently have. We should be doing it. Yeah, it's not the most expensive thing in the world. It just requires somebody recognizing the threat before it's realized. Well, I hope I've answered your questions. I'll turn it back over to Jennifer if she has any more. But I really want to say thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to have a frank and open exchange. Again, I understand where my positions fall, and perhaps they are bolder than some of you have heard. But folks, for 43 years, I have marched every year. I have been involved in constitutional amendments in legislation. As a governor, I signed a partial birth abortion ban. I signed a 24-hour waiting period. I signed a Parental Notification Act. I signed an act that protected mothers from being prosecuted if they would drop their child. If they had a baby and they didn't really want it, if they didn't hurt the child or abandon the child, it would leave it at a fire station or a hospital. There would be no charges filed, called the Baby Sharon Act. We passed the Fetal Protection Act so that if a person committed a criminal act against a pregnant woman and injured the woman and her baby, they would be charged with crimes not only against the woman but also against the child. So I could point to a litany of things done at that level. But at some point, we have to quit simply saying we've just kind of made small dents in this nightmare. We need to wake up from the nightmare and be able to say with clean hands before God, we have stopped this horror. I'm glad Abraham Lincoln had the courage to say, we're going to have fewer slaves after I'm president. Abraham Lincoln ignored the Dred Scott decision of 1857 that declared that people of color were not fully human, only 3/5 of a human. He said he simply would not accept it. He signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and he began to treat people of color with full human rights. He did it in full capacity of ignoring that Supreme Court decision that previously held that black people weren't fully human. I'm glad he did that. I don't know of anybody who today says, well, he shouldn't have done that. He was outside his powers. Today, we thank God he had the courage to say, no more slavery. Enough of this. Nobody I know defends slavery. And I believe the day will come when nobody will defend abortion. But somebody has to say, that's enough. 4,000 babies a day for 43 years is enough. Let's be a better country than that. Jennifer, let me remind the folks, we need you to caucus for us. If you are a pro-life voter and you are serious about it, I hope you go caucus for me and commit to it. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to fill out that card and leave it with us. And tell us you'll be there. Take friends and relatives and people you work with and neighbors. Don't go alone. Caucus is a week from tomorrow night. And right now, the press has already decided who you're going to vote for. They've got it all figured out. They know what. I don't even know why you'd bother caucusing, because they voted for you, haven't they? That's what they've basically done. I've got a great suggestion. You can mess them up. You can really ruin their night. You can go out and tell them that they don't know you as well as you know your own convictions. And I hope that's what you do. All right, Jennifer, thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor Huckabee. Thank you for your long-standing passion on the most important issue that we have before us, the humanity and the sanctity of every life. And I want to thank you publicly for your leadership. I also was one of those few Baptists in the movement very, very early on, and I always said it was 99 Catholics and me, and that's really what it was everywhere I went, and that's to our shame. That's truly to our shame, but I want to thank you publicly for your leadership through the last devastating 43 years. Thank you very much.